Good morning, brave heroes. Welcome home. I'm Ash. This is HeroQuest. And today it's time for another episode of the BwodeCast, a podcast-styled long-form series on the channel dedicated to most things HeroQuest. I would like to say to dungeon crawling on the tabletop, not crawling on the tabletop, but tabletop dungeon crawling in general. Unless your dungeon is completely built out of tabletops, which could be. There's some nice mahogany. You know what? Never mind. Today, I don't have a whole lot to talk about. There's not a whole lot of buzz going on. There's not a whole lot of really interesting speculation that we haven't already covered. There are a few topics that I think are kind of interesting regarding different rule interpretations and clarifications and things like that. But I think I'll save those for an episode that kind of tries to talk about numerous ones at length and kind of seeks to understand different perspectives from people. That's because I recently saw a sort of clarification on the bard's ability to roll an extra defend dice when they are not wearing armor. There's interpretations of that, believe it or not, and I think that that's actually pretty reasonable because the clarification didn't clarify the root of the problem. It just said, yes, I think this ability should be active when he's not wearing armor. I don't know that was the debate, but anyways, that's for another time. Today I want to talk about something a little more maybe esoteric, a little more meta, a little more strange. You may have guessed from the title, of course. It wouldn't take much of a guess. Just look at the title or the thumbnail. We do try to shoehorn the topic into the thumbnail, but this will best be listened to, enjoyed while you are driving to or from work, painting up your miniature armies, doing a little bit of Etsy shopping, dropping the kids off at daycare, during your coffee session in which you enjoy a hot cuppa while you're looking out your back porch at the wintry visage that has now occurred over our northern hemisphere. This episode, we're going to talk about stats. I don't actually like using the word stats. It's a good introductory word or term rather for what we're going to talk about, but it's my favorite term is attributes. Attributes which are tied to a character. They are numbers. They represent different things. In HeroQuest, the word attributes really isn't used, but the heroes have what could be considered attributes. The heroes have numbers attached to them. And attributes are different somewhat per hero, or could be different. Different attributes for the heroes in HeroQuest include body points, mind points, movement dice, technically, even though they're all the same. This is an attribute that can change throughout the game, so it is definitely a variable. And by virtue of it being a dice roll, it's a variable, so the attribute here is the container, 2d6. And attack dice and defend dice, which are also variables since these dice contain different numbers or different values when they are rolled. And this is it. This is the long and short of the attributes for heroes in HeroQuest. There are also abilities that they can or cannot use. This isn't really defined other than saying this hero can do this. And that's it. So the wizard has spells. Kind of the long and short of it. The wizard can use 9 of the 12 available spells that come with the game. The elf can use 3 of the 12 available spells. So that is technically an attribute as well. Another attribute is limitations or specifications of armor, which include armor that can or cannot be used by a specific character. So you kind of have attributes there as well. Now, I'm not talking from the perspective of somebody who plays Dungeons and Dragons so much as I'm talking from the perspective of someone who enjoys studying role-playing games in a video game format and who actually works to create different versions of systems of attributes interacting for the player in a video game context, because I use different RPG engines and I understand the back end on what calculations have to be made for those systems to work efficiently. And when I say efficiently, that's in the context of balance. So your game, which has its attributes for its characters and its weapons and its spells potentially, and even its maps. Maps can have attributes. The maps in HeroQuest have the wandering monster as their primary attribute that makes them somewhat unique. And that's after the cartography of the map. That's after the actual design of the map itself. But another game system could use wildly different attributes and offer a similar challenge. Or you could change one attribute and completely disrupt the entire balance. And that's kind of what I would like to talk about today. What attributes do you like to use in HeroQuest when you are home brewing? Do you use any additional attributes? Do you think that using any additional attributes, even one, is too much of a departure and something that makes the game no longer HeroQuest? You can't see my finger quotes because this is a graphically minimal video today. I don't want to do any recording of the face. I'm just, but I did do finger quotes. So when I am running a game of HeroQuest, I don't add any additional attributes. I pretty much try to play as close to rules as written as possible, and where rules as written are vague, and this is famously a case in many instances throughout HeroQuest history, and it's seen generally as a good thing, even if it does cause some contention. I try to play what I feel was the intention as closely as possible. That's what I like to do during my games, up until the point where it begins to get boring for my players. If that happens, I switch tactics and we begin bringing in some homebrew solutions. And this, for me, includes just using the game system as precedent to add things that are present in other areas. I don't try to add like extra monsters. I don't try to have monsters appear randomly. I may, if I'm going a step further, now that I have the Chaos deck, the Zargon deck, that is going to be a really interesting deck to study with games of HeroQuest. I haven't studied their effect on the games. It's easy enough to look at the cards, any cards from any system, and read what they do and say, oh yeah, I can see how. But once you're sitting in the chair and you activate the card for real in front of your players and you see the response to it and you see them strategizing over how to handle that and you see the realization that the cards do different things in their eyes once you play a new one, well, even the best laid dungeon master plans can go to ruin. You might play a card and think, ha, I've got you now. This is going to be a challenge, but you can overcome it as long as you work together, only to have the barbarian run screaming the opposite direction because they have a completely wrong idea about what's supposed to happen next. Your monster kills the wizard. The elf cries in a corner. The dwarf mistakenly uses an item. Nothing happens. The druid tries to roleplay an action. I'm going to dump this gallon of water that's on the table on his head. That'll put the fire out. You can't do that. Guys, come on. This is HeroQuest. That's a segue. That's a segue just to illustrate the point that generally I don't. But if I was going to introduce a couple of stats into HeroQuest, I would want them to be as agnostic as possible. I'd want them to be as little as possible trying to predefine anything. I don't want to go in and say, well, the barbarian should have the most dexterity, so I'm going to say the barbarian has... No. I would want to create a system that anybody would be able to create a new hero, look at my system, and go, oh, my hero has this much dexterity, because that follows right in line with what's written here. So, not totally agnostic by virtue of simply having been created or introduced, perhaps, or a version of it introduced by me in this sense, in this context, but agnostic in the sense that you don't have to refer to some reference that I've made for all of the heroes, and I don't have to go back and make new references for every hero that comes out. I would like to introduce systems that you can use with any hero at any time, and they always make sense, and you can easily change them from there. Now, that's not to take away from anything out there. No, not to take away from any homebrew system, not any rules overlay. All that stuff is great. If it's working for you, it is great. If you are making it as a resource for other creators and you've already play tested with a bunch of folks and you think that it's right to be introduced out into the wild and spread to other folks, that is great. 100% I support that. What I would like to do is something similar. I would love to create a rules overlay system. I would love to share it, spread it, have folks play test it, have folks tell me what they don't like about it, what they do like. I guess it's kind of self-serving because it's like, is my rules overlay idea something that resonates well with others? Is it too much of a departure? Should it just be its own game? That line is going to be a little bit different for everybody, from purists to folks who are perfectly fine stretching each and every little thing they can in the game because the game kind of lets you do that and homebrew is encouraged. So to some folks, no matter what homebrew you dump on it, it doesn't cease to be HeroQuest. So that all makes sense to me and I love it. But just to talk about attributes, only attributes today, I had an idea that I wanted to share right here on the podcast. So I guess consider it an early peek of a soon-to-be video, a future video here on the channel. I wanted to talk about luck, and I wanted to give this attribute as an example of something that would be as agnostic as possible. Not something that you have to refer to or rebuild every time a new expansion or new character comes out, but something that makes sense permanently. And anytime a new expansion or new character comes out, you're already prepared with exactly what you need to do to continue using this attribute in that new expansion or for that new character. So, without further ado, let's segue into the topic of this particular attribute, luck. Luck is a chaotic thing. You can be lucky, you can be unlucky. Your luck can change. And you can push your luck, and you can test your luck. And this concept is not difficult to convey in the HeroQuest world, where luck already plays a pretty important part. We don't have to use different abilities or ability slots or new character cards or anything to illustrate the concept of luck and have it be ever present in the HeroQuest world. It's already there. So, if we wanted to introduce a new attribute and call it luck, here's how I would do it. And I've talked about this a little bit in the Discord already, because as you know, I'm a big fan of how the Warlock of Firetop Mountain handles luck during part of the character creation process. And the idea is that you will roll 2d6, so the movement dice, or if you prefer, you can roll 1d6 and add 6 to it. Both of these have sort of advantages. If you would like to use the 2d6 system, then everybody is going to really experience a full-on, this is the true chaotic nature of luck. You could roll a 2. You could roll a 12. You could say that that's fine, but you could also just roll 1d6 and add 6 to it in order to give everybody a chance to use the luck throughout the adventure. And I think that that would be a fine, fair decision on Zargon's part. Now, whether you're playing the EU or US game, classic or contemporary, either one, doesn't matter. You establish each hero's luck values. You have each hero roll the 2 dice or 1 die and add 6, and you take that total for each hero. So we'll say the barbarian rolls a total of 8. These are their luck attributes for the quest. And personally, I would have every hero reroll at the beginning of every quest because what's going to happen is luck is tumultuous. It is chaotic. It can go up, it can go down. You can be lucky, you can be unlucky from the start. The hero is going to push their luck if they wish in or at different points in the quest. You can have this primarily as a combat mechanic. You can additionally have them push their luck when they're opening chests or trying to disarm traps, or even if they trigger traps or search for treasure. But to keep it to the combat context and explain that thoroughly, let's say that your hero has encountered a monster, your hero has attacked the monster, your hero has rolled 1 skull and 1 shield, and the monster has rolled 2 white shields. Okay, now you're going to land a successful hit on that monster. It wasn't able to mitigate any of the damage or block it, so it's about to suffer 1 BP of damage. Most monsters are going to die at this point, but let's say that this is a monster that could withstand that damage and still have its next turn. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. If this abomination or mummy is able to move next turn and attack you, then that could be really bad. So you decide to push your luck. If you want to push your luck, roll the 2 movement dice. And if the amount that you rolled is equal to or less than your initial luck score, you are able to roll an additional combat die. But that is if you are successful in pushing your luck. If your 2 movement dice did indeed meet or not exceed in any way the initial luck score that you got, then you were able to re-roll a dice. You may roll another skull. You may not. You may roll another dud. But if you do roll a skull, you were given that opportunity to do so in this turn. You pushed your luck and you were successful. It carried out successfully. That extra skull now applies. The monster is damaged for another BP worth of damage, and that may successfully kill the monster. So it may seem at this point like luck is a broken attribute. It is something that's going to change the balance of the game for the worse. It's really going to blow things out of proportion. But wait, we've only talked about 1/4 of the possibilities here. You see, when you exceed your luck score, when you roll and what you have rolled is higher than what you initially started with, that is when things go south. Now, instead of you getting to roll an extra die, the monster gets to roll an additional die for defense. They now have the opportunity to block that single skull that you rolled. They now have the opportunity to completely mitigate the attack as if no damage were done at all. And that is what happens when you push your luck during an attack. Now, we didn't go through the entire steps. The full system is... Now here's where things get really fun. Here's where the system really finds itself and doesn't really contribute to a broken one-sided game. After you have pushed your luck, regardless of whether you are successful or unsuccessful, your luck score decreases by 1. Every time you push your luck, no matter whether it was successful or unsuccessful, you are less lucky every time. If you want, as Zargon, as the homebrewer, you could create items, potions perhaps, that restore a hero's luck. That might be a bit off for some folks. It might make perfect sense for others. You could have lucky armor. You could have different things that affect your luck score. But by default, every time you test your luck, the score is reduced by 1. And when that happens, now the next time that the hero tests their luck, there is a reduced chance by some margin that they will be able to pass their luck test, that they'll be able to push their luck successfully. So in this way, the system offers slightly diminishing returns because the risk becomes higher that you are going to give the monster the opportunity to defend successfully. Now, you can use this in combat when the hero is defending, and it works out the exact same. After you have rolled for the hero's defense and the monster's attack, the hero can decide to push their luck. This could be role played out as the hero finding an opportunity to dodge or trying to read the monster's movements. They know where that sword's going to go next, and they're going to put their shield in that spot to sort of mitigate the damage they think is incoming if they have read the monster's movements correctly. That sort of thing is very easy to do if you are one of the types that really needs to have a sort of lore or this needs to make sense type reason for your game decisions or mechanics. But essentially, the hero will push their luck in this system, if you can call it that. The monsters do not push their luck. The monsters don't have luck. Just the heroes are in control of this. The hero will roll their 2 movement dice. Again, if their score is equal to or lower than their current luck score, they will be able to roll an additional defend die. If they fail pushing their luck, they have just given the monster a free opportunity to roll 1 more attack die. And this all takes place in the same combat. These are the same combat rounds. The dice that are rolled are in addition to what's already been rolled. So in my mind, anytime, any attack, whether it's melee, ranged, or spell, if you want to push your luck, you are able to roll that additional die. So if you fail, the enemy is able to roll the additional die. That's what makes sense to me. That's how I would play that. That is an example of something that's going to continue to make sense no matter what heroes come out, no matter what expansions come out, no matter what other rules come out, unless there are rules that specifically address the concept of luck. And you could take this concept and stretch it out to apply it to treasure chests, searching rooms for treasure, drawing traps or wandering monster cards, setting off traps, disarming traps. There are a number of situations where you could have heroes test their luck, only prompted by your quest notes and not have anything to do with the combat or the other regular machinations of the game, but purely a roleplay reason. You could actually have an entire room cave in and have all of the heroes in that room roll for luck. And those heroes who successfully roll for luck are able to immediately escape the damage through a door that they have found, and now they're in the hallway. Those heroes who were not able to avoid the damage or avoid the falling ceiling get damage. They can roll combat dice to see if they get hurt for some amount. I'm really going to be repeating a lot of this stuff and expanding on it in a future video, so it kind of feels like I'm cheaping out on the subject, but this is just something that I wanted to introduce as what I think is a good example of an agnostic attribute that fits or seems to fit, in my honest opinion, with HeroQuest and the HeroQuest world. Now, I posed the question about 20 minutes ago, actually, as of the time of recording this video. So very last minute, not giving a big window here, but it's really a matter of time limits and trying to get things done quickly. But still, some people were able to answer the question. I'm very thankful and appreciative of that. I posed the question in the Discord, what sort of attributes are you using in your homebrew, if any? Some folks love rules overlays, they love homebrew systems, they love modular stuff, they love roleplay stuff. There are a few overlays out there that provide you with a complete conversion of your HeroQuest experience. And again, to some people, even the slightest minor change, removing the boot graphic from the map makes it not HeroQuest. That's valid. That's totally fine. We should not disparage somebody for having that line that they don't want crossed for themselves. That's totally reasonable. For other people, it's the same, just the opposite end of the spectrum. You can literally do whatever you want to HeroQuest. As stated before, you could play it on a football field, life-sized, with players who are wearing full Blood Bowl styled gear, fighting Age of Sigmar monsters, and somehow to them that's still HeroQuest. I get it, that's fine. But what do you use? Yami Fira came back pretty quick with, I use none because mostly I don't want to homebrew when my players barely beat the trial. Hey, that's valid. The game system is complete. It doesn't require additional stuff. It needs sometimes for the players to figure out interpretations and stuff, but it doesn't need stats. It doesn't need traits. So that's fine. And that's a good point. When your players are struggling with base game stuff, which hopefully they won't be after the trial. The trial is classically punishing. After the trial is when people really start to find their own. They get a bit of a break. They get a little bit of breathing room. Then they set off the alarm in Quest 2 that spoiler, 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 spoiler. Almost exclusively, I would use this in response to my players who want to play HeroQuest but are getting bored. And it happens. It does happen. Some folks get bored with the basic actions and the routine, the flow of the gameplay. It starts to feel samey for some people. That's not a bad thing. It's not a thing to disparage. It's not a thing to deny. It does happen. It's just subjective, game to game, person to person, sometimes Zargon to Zargon. Moving on, Jay Blackstone also answered pretty quickly. For my homebrew game, HeroQuest, I use the stats as secondary. For strength, I use the number of attack dice. Base strength plus weapon to perform grapple attacks, to move objects, or throw goblins into pits. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Don't throw goblins into pits. I also use mind points as wisdom for uses like magic, ability attacks, and rerolls, used for resisting dread spells, attacks, defense, traps, or movement. I use defense, base plus armor, for dexterity to avoid traps based on how many times per day. So if you have a total of 4 dexterity, so pit trap will cost you 1 dexterity, falling rocks 2 dexterity, etc. That's a pretty cool way to introduce that and utilize it. I like that. What I really like is mind points, and I think that that's probably the most common thing to change with homebrewers and those who really don't want to introduce new attributes, but who see mind points as an opportunity to homebrew in their version of how that should work as an attribute, because mind points are classically underutilized in HeroQuest. They're an afterthought. It's a tragedy, and I think we see some examples of that kind of being worked back in, but for the most part, almost completely wasted in the base game. But mind points being used for literal points that you spend on things like new spells for homebrew heroes and the like, that makes the most sense to me. It's a pretty safe go-to move to use the mind points as either a spell usage currency or to base new spells off of if you have the appropriate amount of mind points. Yeah, I do like that. So this question really is for everybody, whether you are thinking about developing a homebrew rules overlay sort of system, or just wanting to introduce a single attribute, or you are currently working on one, or you have already made one. Perhaps you have shared it with folks, perhaps not yet, or you would like to see something like that either in retail or are interested in seeking out homebrew systems. What attributes do you think are most helpful for making HeroQuest more immersive, more engaging, more entertaining, more challenging for you and your party of heroes at your table? What attributes should the game completely avoid? What attributes would be game breaking? What attributes would cause the game to need to be entirely rebalanced, redesigned, maybe in some cases? I would be interested to hear your feedback. Thank you very much for listening. I think that's going to be time for me today. Make sure to check out the Discord, check out the Patreon if you'd like to see some of the various benefits that I can offer my patrons. And I would love to thank the following people for their very generous contributions: Nutshell, Ward Icon, Matt McNett, Justin and Sarah, Radioactive Bullfrog, Dan Nastic, John Boyle,